The flight attendant's voice cut sharply through the hum of the luxury cabin. "I'm going to ask you one last time, move to the back of the jet, or I'll call security." Her words dripped with condescension, slicing through the plush atmosphere like a blade. Every passenger within earshot turned, eyes wide, heads swiveling like spectators at a tennis match. But the woman at the center of it all, Simone Harris, a composed black woman in her late 30s, didn't flinch. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as she looked up at the flight attendant. "I've already told you," she said, her voice even, "I'm not moving." There was no anger, no raised voice, just a quiet strength that sent a ripple of unease through the cabin. Simone had been humiliated in front of everyone, publicly challenged. But no one, not the crew, not the well-heeled passengers, and especially not the woman barking orders, had any idea who she truly was. The jet shimmered under the scorching Arizona sun, parked on the tarmac at Scottsdale Executive Airport. Its sleek silver fuselage gleamed like a mirror, promising luxury and exclusivity to its elite travelers. Inside, the Gulfstream G700's cabin was a sanctuary of wealth, ivory leather recliners, gold-trimmed fixtures, and the faint scent of imported sandalwood. Passengers sipped Perrier Jus at Belle Epoque and scrolled through their iPads, the soft hum of the engines barely interrupting the ambient jazz humming through discreet ceiling speakers. Simone Harris stepped into the cabin with silent confidence. Clad in a tailored midnight blue blazer over matching slacks, her presence didn't scream for attention, but it drew it anyway. Her posture, her pace, the slight upward tilt of her chin, it all spoke volumes without a word. This flight wasn't just another leg of travel for her. It was a journey to oversee a key expansion of her corporate empire on the West Coast. But no one on board knew that yet. She preferred it that way for now. At the front of the cabin, Heather Maxwell, the lead flight attendant, greeted each passenger with a carefully calibrated smile. In her early 40s, Heather's uniform was crisp, her sandy blonde bob perfectly styled, her posture rigid with authority. "Good afternoon, welcome aboard," she beamed at one sharply dressed man. To the elegant couple behind him, she added, "Always a pleasure to have you with us again, Mr. and Mrs. Dalton." The Daltons, retired real estate moguls in their 60s, offered polite smiles. Mrs. Dalton immediately reached for the knitting bag in her lap, while her husband unfolded a Wall Street Journal and adjusted his seat. But when Heather turned to Simone, her demeanor cooled noticeably. Her lips curved just slightly, barely enough to call a smile. "Welcome aboard," she said curtly, stepping aside without meeting Simone's eyes. Simone offered a soft nod and continued to her seat, third row, window side. As other passengers stowed designer luggage and settled in, Heather moved down the aisle to ensure everything was in order. She offered Mrs. Dalton a warm, "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" to which the older woman replied with a gentle shake of her head. Mr. Dalton simply raised his coffee in a silent toast of satisfaction. But when Heather reached Simone's seat, her eyes flicked down to the woman's carry-on tucked neatly underfoot. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She said nothing. No offer of water. No pleasantries. Just a sharp pivot and an exaggerated smile for the passenger behind her. Have you ever seen someone's attitude shift based on appearances? Simone noticed it all. She didn't say a word. But her eyes, dark, discerning, unblinking, took in everything. Heather Maxwell thrived on control. She'd been in aviation for nearly 2 decades, and in her mind, order wasn't just policy, it was aesthetic. Presentation mattered. Posture mattered. And to Heather, Simone didn't look the part. It wasn't just her skin. It was her calm. Her confidence. The way she didn't look around for validation like most VIP passengers did. The way she made herself comfortable, too comfortable, in Heather's opinion. And Heather didn't like it. She made a deliberate turn, her patent leather flats clicking softly on the aisle carpet. She stopped in front of Simone's row, forced a tight smile, and spoke in a voice that was sweet on the surface but laced with venom. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, "I think you're in the wrong section." Simone looked up slowly. Her eyes met Heather's, unwavering. I believe this is my seat, she replied calmly. Heather's smile didn't fade, but her voice hardened by half a degree. This section is reserved for elite platinum passengers only, she said. I don't think you're supposed to be here. Passengers around them began to glance over. A well-tanned woman in designer sunglasses leaned closer, whispering behind her hand. Across the aisle, a man in a gray suit mid-40s, salt and pepper beard watched the exchange with a furrowed brow. Simone didn't blink. You might want to check your manifest before making assumptions, she said simply. Heather's eyes narrowed. I don't need to check anything, she snapped. I know who belongs here and who doesn't. The tension was thick now. The soft music had faded to background noise. People were watching. Whispering. A man near the back muttered, she's probably trying to score a free upgrade. Another shrugged. I mean, look at her. Who wears slacks on a private jet? Heather squared her shoulders, arms crossed. If you don't move to the back, I'll call security, she said, her voice rising for effect. I won't ask again. Simone tilted her head, serene. Call whoever you need to, she said. But I'm not moving. The jet was still on the ground. But the pressure in the cabin had reached cruising altitude. Simone Harris sat still, her back straight, her hands gently resting on her lap. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to justify herself to anyone. Her mere presence, the calm, the control, was beginning to unsettle Heather Maxwell in ways she couldn't explain. Heather turned on her heel and walked briskly toward the junior flight attendant, a soft-spoken woman in her 20s named Rachel Connor. Rachel stood awkwardly near the service station at the front of the cabin, her clipboard clutched in both hands. Rachel, Heather snapped, escort her to the back. Rachel blinked, her eyes darting from Heather to Simone. She hesitated, lips parting slightly as if to speak, to suggest checking the passenger list just to be sure. But Heather's glare was a wall. Rachel nodded stiffly, her grip tightening on the clipboard. She took a tentative step forward. Meanwhile, Simone shifted slightly in her seat. There was no panic in her movements, no urgency. She simply turned her head to Rachel and said, in a voice low but unmistakably strong. You may want to think very carefully about what you're about to do. Rachel froze. Heather scoffed loudly behind her. I know exactly what I'm doing, she barked. Now get up. The tension in the cabin spiked. It hummed under the plush carpeting, pulsed through the leather seats. No one was scrolling through their phones anymore. Champagne glasses were forgotten on tray tables. Simone leaned back into her seat just a touch, her chin lifting slightly. You shouldn't make assumptions about people, she said quietly. That was when it happened. A woman seated 2 rows ahead, Cassandra Boyd, a socialite from Palm Beach with too much money and too little awareness, turned to her friend and whispered, just loud enough for others to hear, she's probably trying to sneak in for a free ride. Heather latched onto the comment like a hawk. She folded her arms, her voice rising. That's exactly what it looks like, she said, turning toward the other passengers as though seeking validation. We have rules for a reason, and some people just don't respect them. Simone didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence, her unflinching stare, her refusal to be provoked at all spoke louder than any retort could. Rachel stood frozen beside her, clipboard still clutched tightly. Her eyes flicked to the manifest hanging near the cockpit door. Maybe the woman's name is there, she thought. But just as she moved to check, Heather snapped again. Rachel, what are you doing? Rachel flinched. I've got this under control, Heather cut in. You don't need to get involved. Rachel backed away, her face flushing. Across the aisle, the man in the gray suit, Daniel Mercer, a venture capitalist from Denver, had seen enough. He leaned forward, catching Simone's eye. Excuse me, he said gently. Is everything all right? Simone's expression softened. I'm fine, thank you, she replied, her voice steady, appreciative. Before Daniel could say another word, Heather jumped in. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you didn't encourage this disturbance," she snapped, then turned back to Simone, jabbing a finger toward her chest. "You're causing a scene." Daniel leaned back slowly, his eyes narrowing. "From where I'm sitting," he said calmly, "you're the one making a scene." Heather's face turned crimson. She whipped her head back to Simone. "I've had enough of this," she hissed. "Either you move, or I'll make sure you're escorted off this plane." Simone met her gaze. "You can try," she said. Heather's hands clenched into fists. "Why don't you just admit you're in the wrong seat and stop wasting everyone's time?" But Simone didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't say a word. Instead, she slowly picked up her phone from the armrest, her fingers moving with calm precision. She typed a few lines. Hit send. Set the phone back down. "You're making a mistake," she said simply. Heather rolled her eyes. "We'll see about that." She turned back to Rachel. "Escort her now." Rachel hesitated. Again. Then, without a word, she inched toward the manifest. Her fingers trembled as she scanned it. But before she could speak, Heather spun on her. "I said I've got this." Rachel stepped back again, face flushed with shame. Passengers were whispering now. Quiet murmurs filled the air, like static on a forgotten radio. "Who is she, really?" one asked. "Why is she so calm?" another said. The socialite shrank slightly in her seat, sensing something had shifted. But Heather hadn't noticed. She returned to Simone's row, her voice sharp, her eyes blazing. "I'm going to ask you one last time," she said, loudly enough for the whole cabin to hear. "Move to the back of the jet or I will call airport security." The moment hung in the air, taut like a pulled string. Simone looked up at her again. "I've already told you," she said, her voice low and composed. "I'm not moving." Heather's eye twitched. Her chest rose with a deep breath, then fell. She looked around the cabin, as if searching for backup. No one moved. No one said a word. Even Rachel stood quietly at the front, biting her lip, her eyes wet with something that looked suspiciously like shame. And Heather? She didn't realize it yet, but this was the beginning of her downfall. Because Simone Harris was no ordinary passenger. Heather Maxwell turned sharply, storming down the aisle toward the galley. Her polished heels clicked with purpose against the plush carpet. Her face was tight with fury, her mind scrambling for control. The woman in seat 3A, Simone Harris, had just embarrassed her in front of a plane full of elite passengers, and Heather refused to let that stand. She returned moments later with a silver tray of Perrier and lime water, serving first Mr. and Mrs. Dalton in row 1. The elderly couple smiled warmly, exchanging soft pleasantries as Heather hovered, all warmth restored for them. But as she approached row 3 again, the warmth vanished. Simone sat silently, her posture perfect, her gaze out the window. She had said nothing since the standoff, and yet her very presence seemed to mock Heather's authority. Her calmness was unbearable. Heather paused in front of her seat. "Excuse me," Simone said politely, "may I have a glass of water, please?" Heather's eyes flicked over Simone with the same dismissive disdain as before. "I'll get to you when I can," she said curtly, walking away without stopping. Simone blinked slowly and said nothing. She didn't have to. The passengers near her shifted awkwardly in their seats, some exchanging glances, others suddenly busying themselves with seat controls and earbuds. But everyone felt it. The tension. The injustice. The underlying current of something wrong. Minutes passed. The jet cruised above the Rockies now, the sky clear, the turbulence light, but the mood inside the cabin? Turbulent. Simone adjusted slightly in her seat, stretching her leg a few inches into the aisle, subtle, unintentional. When Heather returned down the aisle again, tray still half full, her sharp eyes caught the movement. What happened next didn't seem like an accident. Heather veered to the left deliberately, purposefully, and let her foot collide squarely with Simone's outstretched leg. The tray wobbled violently, and in an instant, cold sparkling water spilled across Simone's lap and onto the carpeted floor. The tray clattered loudly. Water splashed across her slacks. Heather gasped with exaggerated horror. "Oh my God! Watch where you're putting your legs. You've caused a mess." Heads turned. Gasps echoed throughout the cabin. Simone looked down at her soaked lap, then up at Heather, her expression still eerily composed. "You walked into my leg," she said calmly, dabbing her pants with a napkin. Her voice was measured. Unshaken. But behind the calm, her eyes burned with clarity. "I've only ever asked to be treated with the same respect as everyone else," she said softly. "And if that's too much to ask, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here." The words hit like a slap. Heather froze that a beat of silence passed. Then, suddenly, in an act that would haunt her for the rest of her career, Heather snapped. "You think you can talk to me like that?" she hissed, and without warning, she slapped Simone across the face. The sound rang through the cabin like a gunshot. Passengers gasped. Mrs. Dalton dropped her knitting. Mr. Dalton slammed his paper shut. Daniel Mercer half stood from his seat, his expression twisted in disbelief. Even Cassandra Boyd, the nosy socialite who had whispered earlier, covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Rachel Connor stood motionless at the front of the plane, her clipboard nearly slipping from her hands. Her face was pale, eyes wide with horror. Simone sat completely still. The red mark blooming on her cheek was the only sign anything had happened. She didn't touch her face. She didn't rise. She didn't react. She simply looked at Heather with a gaze so piercing, so full of quiet judgment, that Heather, who had just struck another human being mid-flight, stumbled back a step. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Simone said softly. Her voice was still gentle. But it carried a chill that dropped the cabin temperature 10 degrees. Heather's face twitched. Her confidence cracked. Passengers didn't whisper anymore. They stared silent, shocked, some with their phones now subtly recording. Simone finally spoke again, each word deliberate, firm. "I've been patient with you," she said, still seated, still composed. "But your behavior has crossed the line." Heather's voice shot up in pitch. "Crossed the line?" she snapped. "You're the one who's been disruptive since you got on this plane." Simone didn't flinch. Instead, she straightened her posture imperceptibly at first, then with quiet command. Her spine aligned, her hands rested calmly on the seat arms. Her eyes never left Heather's. "You'll regret that," she said. The tone wasn't angry. It wasn't even cold. It was final. Heather's mouth opened in protest. "Regret it?" she spat. "What are you going to do, call the police?" Simone said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence was louder than any answer. From the corner of the cabin, Rachel finally stirred. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her phone. She stepped behind the galley curtain, voice low but clear. "This is Rachel Connor," she said. "We have a situation on Flight 727. I need to speak with the director immediately." When she returned, her face was pale, but her jaw was set. Heather, meanwhile, stood rigid, arms crossed, breathing shallowly. Around her, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. No one looked at her with respect anymore. No one saw her as the authority. Simone Harris sat silently, still damp with water, still marked by a slap, and yet somehow, she was the only one in control. The passengers could feel it. So could Rachel. So could Daniel. And, deep down, even Heather knew it. Something irreversible had just happened. And what came next would shake the entire airline to its core. The cabin fell into a fragile silence, no music, no chatter, no movement. Just the dull hum of the Gulfstream's engines as it cruised at 40,000 feet over Utah. Heather Maxwell paced at the front of the plane, her heels clicking, her fists clenched. Her polished exterior was cracking. Around her, passengers had stopped whispering. Now they simply stared at her, at Simone Harris, at one another. The slap had changed everything. And Simone? Still seated. Still silent. Still composed. But something in her shifted. Without looking up, she picked up her phone from the armrest, opened a messaging app, and began typing with slow, deliberate movements. She sent the message and set the phone back down. The gesture was quiet, but it sent chills down Heather's spine. Heather turned sharply. "What do you think you're doing?" she barked. Simone didn't even blink. "You'll find out soon enough," she said softly. Heather scoffed, but her voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Is that some kind of threat?" Simone didn't respond. The other passengers watched closely now. Cassandra Boyd leaned toward her companion, whispering urgently, "Do you think she's important?" Across the aisle, Daniel Mercer sat still, tapping one finger slowly against his armrest, his expression unreadable but knowing. Just then, from the front of the cabin, a sound broke the tension: footsteps. The cockpit door swung open. The pilot stepped out, a tall man in his early 50s with silvering hair and a deep crease across his brow. His face was pale. His eyes scanned the cabin once, then settled on Heather. He walked quickly down the aisle, stopping just inches from her. "Heather," he said, his voice firm but low. "You need to step aside." Heather's mouth opened in disbelief. "Excuse me," she said, crossing her arms. "Why would I do that? I've got this under control." The pilot didn't budge. "I just received a call from corporate," he said. "The owner of this aircraft is on board." He paused. Then, gesturing toward Simone, he said clearly, "She's Miss Simone Harris." A second of total stillness. Then, gasps. Mouths dropped open. Cassandra Boyd physically recoiled into her seat. "She owns the plane," she whispered, eyes wide. Daniel Mercer gave a small nod to himself, as if confirming a private suspicion. "Knew it," he murmured. At the front, Rachel Connor stood frozen, her jaw slack. Simone didn't move. She didn't need to. Heather stared at the pilot, face draining of color. "That can't be," she stammered. "There must be a mistake. This woman she doesn't even act like." Her voice faltered. The cabin was dead quiet. The pilot straightened. "This isn't a mistake." Suddenly, the plane's intercom buzzed to life. The captain's voice echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an unscheduled landing shortly. Please remain seated and prepare for descent." Confusion rippled through the passengers. Heads turned. Murmurs rose. Heather spun toward the front. "What's going on? Why are we landing?" Simone didn't answer. She didn't have to. The jet began its smooth descent toward a private airfield just outside San Francisco. Within minutes, the wheels touched down, kissing the tarmac with surgical precision. Waiting on the ground was a sleek black Cadillac Escalade, flanked by two sharply dressed individuals in dark suits. As the aircraft door opened, the two assistants climbed the stairs and stepped aboard with calm efficiency. Their presence alone radiated authority. "Miss Harris," one of them said warmly, bowing his head slightly. "Everything is ready for your review." More gasps. Cassandra covered her mouth again. "Miss Harris," she whispered. Heather stumbled backward, eyes darting between Simone and the assistants. This isn't possible," she said, barely audible. The assistants ignored her. "Do you need anything before we proceed?" one of them asked Simone. Simone stood slowly. Graceful. Deliberate. She adjusted her navy blazer and stepped into the aisle, facing the entire cabin for the first time. Her voice was calm. Steady. Unshakable. "I'm Simone Harris," she said, "the owner of this aircraft and the CEO of Harris Air." Another audible gasp swept through the rows. The nosy socialite actually dropped her clutch onto the floor. Mr. Dalton folded his paper and gave Simone a subtle, respectful nod. Mrs. Dalton paused her knitting. "Heather." She couldn't speak. Her jaw trembled. Simone turned to face her directly now. "Heather," she began, her tone sharp but measured, "your behavior today has been nothing short of disgraceful." Heather stammered. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't care to know," Simone interrupted. "You didn't treat me with courtesy. You didn't check the manifest. You made assumptions. You acted on prejudice." The entire plane was silent. Simone stepped forward. "You humiliated yourself. You disrespected a passenger. And you embarrassed my airline." Heather's mouth opened again. No sound came out. Simone's voice was cool, but laced with fire beneath the surface. "There's no mistake here, Heather. You were wrong." She gestured toward the pilot. "I want this addressed immediately. And I want assurance that this never happens to another passenger ever again." The pilot nodded, his face set. "Understood, Miss Harris." Heather took a trembling step backward. Her voice cracked. "Miss Harris. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to get caught," Simone replied coldly. "But you were." Heather opened her mouth to protest, but before she could utter another word, the pilot stepped between them. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Miss Harris has made it clear you're unfit for this role. Effective immediately, you are terminated." Heather's face crumpled. "Please," she whispered, I can't lose this job." Simone didn't flinch. "This was your choice," she said. "Now face the consequences." At that moment, 2 uniformed airport police officers boarded the plane. The energy shifted again. Passengers began whispering. The lead officer stepped forward. "Miss Harris," he said respectfully. "We received your report. Are you pressing charges?" Simone's eyes locked onto Heather. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and firm. "She assaulted me in front of multiple witnesses." Heather's knees buckled slightly. "Wait," she cried. "This is a misunderstanding." The second officer moved swiftly, pulling a pair of cuffs from his belt. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for assault," he said. "You have the right to remain silent." Heather's breathing grew rapid. Her face was white as chalk. As the cuffs snapped around her wrists, she turned back to Simone, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "Please don't do this." Simone's expression didn't soften. "Your apology means nothing without accountability," she said quietly. "You made your choices. Now you face the consequences." And with that, Heather was led off the plane, once the queen of the cabin, now just another person removed for misconduct, shamed and forgotten. Simone turned back to the passengers. "I apologize," she said gently, "for what you had to witness today. This is not the standard of service I expect on my flights." There was a beat of silence. Then applause. It started with Daniel Mercer. Then Mrs. Dalton. Then the whole cabin. Simone smiled faintly, nodding once. Justice had taken flight and landed exactly where it belonged. As the echo of applause faded into the leather walls of the cabin, Simone Harris turned to the young flight attendant who had silently borne witness to the entire incident. "Rachel," she said, her tone warmer now, "I saw your professionalism today. I saw your hesitation. That wasn't weakness, it was principle. Thank you for standing with integrity when it mattered." Rachel's eyes widened. "Miss Harris," she said, stunned, "thank you. You'll be hearing from my office, Simone said with a soft smile. We need more people like you in leadership. Rachel nodded, eyes misty with disbelief. Simone stepped toward the door of the jet. The warm California breeze greeted her as she descended the steps toward the waiting Cadillac Escalade. Her assistants flanked her, speaking in calm tones about an upcoming meeting in Santa Monica. But her thoughts drifted far behind her back to that cabin, to the humiliation turned power, to the message now echoing far beyond the confines of that plane. A moment that was never supposed to be seen, had become a spark. 3 days later, Simone sat in the polished glass studio of a major news network in Los Angeles. She wore the same navy blazer, a subtle nod to the now viral footage. Across from her sat Robin Kelly, a respected primetime interviewer with millions of viewers tuning in. Miss Harris, Robin began, your story has gone viral. Over 40 million views in under 72 hours. I think what everyone wants to know is how did you stay so calm? Simone's gaze was steady, her voice smooth and clear. Respect is not a privilege, she said. It's a right. Every human being deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of what they look like, what they wear, or what others assume about them. Robin nodded, visibly moved. And what would you say to those who don't have your platform, she asked. Those who face this kind of behavior every day, but can't call in the cavalry. Simone's answer came without hesitation. I'd say strength doesn't come from status. It comes from self-worth. You don't need to be a CEO to stand up for yourself. You just need to know that your presence matters. That you belong. A week later, Simone boarded another Harris Air flight, this time from LAX to New York City. As she stepped aboard, the new lead flight attendant greeted her with a sincere smile. Welcome aboard, Miss Harris, he said. It's truly an honor to have you with us. Simone smiled back. Thank you. The difference was tangible. The energy. The service. The mutual respect. She settled into her seat at the front of the cabin. Out the window, the runway blurred into motion, then lifted into sky. The world below fell away in a haze of blue and gold, but Simone felt no weight, only lightness. This wasn't just about reclaiming power. It was about reshaping the system. Back at headquarters, Simone recorded a public statement, released on every major social media platform. She didn't hire a PR firm. She didn't read a script. She just spoke. Luxury, she said, looking into the camera, isn't about how much something costs. It's about how people feel when they experience it. True success, she continued, isn't measured by what you can afford but by how you treat others. That's why I'm implementing new internal policies at Harris Air. Mandatory bias training. Anonymous passenger satisfaction tracking. And above all, zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior, no matter who it comes from. She paused, then added with quiet power. We're not just flying above the clouds anymore. We're raising the standard of decency on every flight. Within hours, hashtags trended globally, hashtag respect above all, hashtag Simone Harris flight. Hashtag you belong here. People across industries began sharing their own stories of hidden biases, power imbalances, and the quiet strength of standing firm. The moment had become a movement. From boardrooms to baggage claims, Simone Harris had turned a slap into a shift. Back in the sky, Simone gazed out the window again. She could see the edge of the horizon, the place where blue met gold and everything felt infinite. She smiled not with pride, but with peace. Because she knew something that couldn't be undone. Sometimes, the most powerful victories aren't about winning an argument. They're about inspiring change. And on that jet 30,000 feet above judgment, ego, and outdated norms, Simone Harris had done exactly that. You just witnessed what happens when power meets prejudice and dignity wins. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's about every room you've ever been told you don't belong in. It's about refusing to shrink so others feel comfortable. It's about the day respect punched back. Quietly. And with power. Think you're just a nobody. So did they until she stood up. Think silence is strength? It is when it's strategic. Think you can't change the system? Watch her do it in real time. Enough is enough. Prejudice hides in politeness. In rules. In silence. But so does power. Your power. If you believe respect is a right, not a reward. Drop a comment. Hit that subscribe button. Smash like if you've ever been underestimated. Because this isn't just a video, it's a reminder to the world, we don't ask for respect. We command it. And next time someone tells you to move to the back, let them know whose jet they're standing on.